Hiya 12. Hope you're all right. I just thought I would do a sort of walking, talking mock paper with you. So the paper that I gave you earlier in the week, I thought I'd talk through the questions and it might make it a little bit easier for you to try and understand how to apply the knowledge to the exam questions. So ideally, you will print off a couple of things, but obviously if you don't print them off, don't worry. I will attach this PowerPoint and the mark scheme and the examiner's report on Show My Homework, so then you can print what you need and go back to this if you need to. Okie dokie. Question 3A said study figure 2 in the resource booklet, and I've put a copy of figure 2 on this slide so you can remind yourself. Suggest one way the writer of the blog presents a negative view of this attempt at regeneration. Okay, so if you look at figure 2, basically you've got a photo of Hull and you've got a blog. So I'm going to just read this to you. The City of Culture thing is underway. The year is financed by partners like Siemens who get to choose the new artwork in the middle of the town. This large German transnational company makes wind turbines in an old dock out in East Hull. And being a major sponsor, partner, they get to plonk, tastefully place, bits of their product in the town square. Oh, to be sure, it's officially a sculpture by the name of the Blade, but anyone can see this is just product placement advertising their company. I won't bore you with the statistics of size and weight, since I know you won't be impressed. Let's just say it's big and ugly. And you certainly don't want to know how it got there. Let's just say the fairies left it overnight. The locals, however, seem pleased with their gift and go up to it and touch it as if it wasn't real. All very odd. Still, if it keeps them happy, I suppose it does no harm. So much for regeneration! ! So, why does the writer of the blog present a negative view of this attempt at regeneration? So people will have approached this different ways, and hopefully you've got your own answer in front of you. This is what the mark scheme says. So you basically only have to write about one negative view. Suggest one way the writer of the blog presents a negative view. So it's much better not to make 3 different ways. It's much better to write about one way, and then you need to develop that point. So if you look at the examples down here, you've got the sculpture is out of place in Hull. So it doesn't look like it belongs in Hull, as it's overlarge and it dominates the town square. And that would get you 3 marks. Or the wind turbine is nothing but advertising for Siemens, who is a major sponsor of the City of Culture, giving it the right to place an inappropriate object in Hull. So you can see there on the mark scheme how easy it is to get those 3 marks. What I've got on the next slide, example. So just have a little look at this example. I'll read it to you and have a think about how many marks you think this question would get. So the blog writer uses sarcasm to show a negative view of the attempt of regeneration in Hull. For example, they use sentences such as, this large German TNC makes wind turbines, and being a major sponsor, partner, they get to plonk, tastefully place, bits of their product, ... So, obviously, we'll do this live as well, but some people might have said it would get 2 marks, some people might have said 3. It actually gets 2 marks, and the reason why it only gets 2 marks is that it talks about sarcasm, so that's the one way that the sarcastic language is being used, but there's no final sentence to suggest the consequence of this for the people of Hull. So it basically says this is the technique they've used. They've used sarcasm. It gives an example, but it doesn't really link that back to why that's negative. And hence it only gets 2 out of 3. Trust this example. I'll read it to you. Think about what you think this would get. The writer uses a very harsh, sarcastic tone when describing the sculpture by saying it is boring and ugly and that Siemens only want business out of it, which suggests the regeneration has been to the advantage of the private investors and not for the local people. Hopefully you can see there that the student has written that they've used sarcastic, harsh language. They've then given an example of how they've used that, and then they've linked it to how this is advantageous to the investor, not to the local people. So it's like the same point, but developed. And you can obviously look back at those, and I've put the link to those on Show My Homework. Okay, next question. So this question says, suggest reasons why perceptions may vary in cities such as Hull about the success of regeneration. So this is all about people's opinions and how stakeholders, or players, as they use the term in the A-level spec, have different views on how successful regeneration is. So you can talk about any cities that we've studied. You can talk about, hopefully some of you might have mentioned Glasgow, or you might have mentioned Los Angeles, or Bristol, or any of the places we've studied. You could even talk about Exeter as our local city, and some of you might have even talked about Hull, even though we've not studied it. I would suggest that in a question like this, you don't talk about Hull, or you don't talk about the city they've used in the resource unless you're absolutely desperate, because actually you've learnt so much about other cities like Glasgow and Los Angeles and Swansea and so on, that you could write a really good answer to this using your own knowledge rather than just relying on the unknown about Hull. So this is kind of the mark scheme, which isn't actually all that useful to you, I don't think, but you need to kind of talk about different strategies, different stakeholders. So you might talk about local people, you might talk about business owners, you might talk about developers, you might talk about the government as a stakeholder, and then you need to actually talk about the reasons why their opinions or views might vary. So the best way to kind of elaborate on this. So this is an example answer. I'm going to read it to you. So perceptions may vary depending on the players involved in regeneration. For example, businesses and those involved in the tourist industry may view some regeneration as a failure if the focus is on the local community and therefore fails to attract tourists, whereas a local person in the same situation may view the regeneration as a success due to an improved or easier day-to-day life, e.g. better housing may satisfy homeowners but not businesses. Also, the success of regeneration between the local and national government and local people may vary, as the cost of regeneration may be not worth the benefit. Citizens may also be dismayed about the regeneration, as it may be a hindrance or make the area unfriendly to live in, e.g. building the train track such as the High Speed 2 beside homes. Okay, so a 6-mark question. What do you think? This student got 4 out of 6. And the reason they got 4 and not 6 out of 6 is because they gave brief consideration to the perceptions of local people, house owners. Reasons are explained really briefly, but none of the reasons are detailed and none of them are supported with evidence. The point about HS2 is interesting, but such infrastructure development's not easy to apply to regeneration of cities and make more work. So if you were going to use that as an example, you would have to explain contrasting perspectives in much more detail. So the student kind of didn't really link his points or her points very well to the examples and didn't develop them, but still got 4 out of 6, which if you got that all the way through would actually be fairly good. This is an example of a student that got 6 out of 6, so I'm going to just read this one. Success is measured differently by different people depending on their viewpoint and what impact the chosen regeneration has on them, as it will differ for individuals. Local, long-time residents may be divided by change, as some locals with a personal attachment to an area might be opposed to the change. Others, however, may not have lived there as long and would appreciate improvements being made as they don't have the same level of attachment. Such divisions are often seen in the old versus the younger residents of an area. Another factor is the economic impact that regeneration has on different people. The LDDC's intervention in London's East End has meant that £10 million of spending on the improvement of residential areas and social housing. 22,000 homes were built, however, the residents couldn't afford the rapid increase in pricing and so had to move further away from the areas they initially lived, creating resentment against the developers and new people moving in. In this case, the regeneration was not catered to the existing residents, creating tension. Okay, it's a level 3 answer because it demonstrates accurate and relevant understanding throughout. The use of the Docklands Regeneration Project, although from decades ago, is appropriate as it allows for examination of the contrasting perceptions. Age is mentioned but not explained. And you could write an answer better than this, I think, about Glasgow, about changes in Los Angeles, the river revitalisation scheme. You could talk about Swansea and the redevelopment of the university there and how that caused divisions in Swansea. There's all sorts of things that you could talk about for that. But the key thing is that you need to pick, two potentially different stakeholders and fully explain the reasoning behind their different perceptions. So you need to make it really clear and structured and develop points. And you can see here in this example, there's evidence as well. So there's numerical data that supports this student's points. Okay, so question 3b says, with reference to a named example, explain the limitations of the strategies used to regenerate a rural place. So remember, rural is countryside. So you cannot write about a city here. And if you do write about a city, or if you have written about a city, you will get 0 marks straight away. So if you've written about the limitations of the Glasgow regeneration, 0, even if what you've written is accurate, because the question is asking for a rural place. So the rural place that we've studied is Cornwall. And you can talk about a specific place in Cornwall. So you could talk about Newquay or you could talk about the St Austell area. But if you wrote about Cornwall, that would be fine. Okay. Again, the mark scheme I don't think is as good, but you can read the mark scheme in your own time. Basically, you're talking here about some of the problems that regeneration schemes have had. So the Eden project is quite a good example that could be used as well. Okay, so this example, this got 5 out of 6, and I'm just going to read it to you. So it's about Bronte Country in England. Here, regeneration efforts have been quite substantial, largely capitalising on the heritage of the Bronte family to encourage tourism. In ways, this has been successful, as villages local to the area had until recently been mostly in economic decline with little opportunity. However, the rapid shift in industry, largely from agriculture to tourism and the service sector, has been jarring and difficult to adjust for many. In addition, the large influx of tourism has been physically degrading to the local villages as they struggle to accommodate the vehicles and crowds of people, which in turn negatively impacts on residents' quality of life. So economic successes have been found for most, but at the cost of rapidly shifting employment sectors and local quality of life and environment. Okay, so I can see there it's kind of the general basis of the answer is really, really good. It's got 5 out of 6, which is a really good answer. But what the exam board said, talked about heritage tourism, so tourism about the local area, but more depth is needed. It needs further development. So where people have had trouble adjusting, they need to explain why they've had trouble adjusting, and where they've talked about overcrowding and the impact on the local community, they need to support that with evidence. Okay, so it's much better to come up with two ideas. So if you're talking about Eden project, one of the limitations might be the traffic, so you would need to talk about the traffic, explain how that's had an impact, and also give some evidence. And another limitation might be how it's taken away from other local jobs. or local businesses, and again you'd need to explain that. So it's really key to develop the points rather than make lots of different points. Okay, this question is, for your local place and contrasting place, evaluate the view that low income is the most important factor leading to deprivation. So I'm not going to read through the model answer for this one, and this one's obviously much harder to mark yourself, and I will organise for you to actually write this essay properly and send me a copy, which I will then mark and give you proper feedback. But this is the mark scheme. So deprivation can be in lots of different forms. So you can have economic deprivation, which is basically lack of money, lack of job opportunities, business investment isn't there, poor education. And you can have social deprivation, which kind of comes, it normally leads on after that. So social deprivation would be having a lower income means that you don't have as good health and you might turn to crime. So a little bit about the cycle of deprivation. So what you need to talk about is you need to have two places, your local place and your contrasting place, and think about deprivation in those two places and the reasons why that deprivation has occurred. All the time evaluating whether low income is the most important reason or whether actually some of the other reasons might be more important. So obviously your local place is likely to be Sidmouth, but you could use Devon as a more kind of a larger area, or Exeter if you wanted to, although we've looked more at Sidmouth. And then your contrasting place could be literally any of the places we've looked at, really. So we looked at Bethnal Green in London right back at the beginning of this unit. Obviously Glasgow would be a good one. Swansea would be another good contrast to Sidmouth. And looking at, what the deprivation is and the reasons for it, and then linking it back to the question to say whether income is the most important factor. So this is a really difficult essay and one that's quite tricky to explain in this format. So what I have done is 18 marks, which you could print, because I've put the PowerPoint separately on Show My Homework, and have a little read. And maybe a good idea would be to use this as like a model answer, but use your local place and a contrasting place. So have a go at looking at how this student tackled the question and see if you can do the same for your local place and a contrasting place. And if it means you have to do a bit more research about Sidmouth or East Devon as your local place, then that would be a really good use of your time. In our lesson on Thursday, so hopefully we'll have a short live lesson on Thursday, I'll explain this bit in more detail. Okay, I hope that's helped a little bit. I will be setting a date for you to do this 20-mark question. Some of you will have had a go, but you might want to go back, reflect on what you've written, type it up, alter bits, add bits, whatever, and there'll be a deadline to hand that in, which then I will actually print them off, mark them, and then scan them back and give you feedback, which I think is really important at this stage. That's just part of the question that carries on. Okay, hopefully look forward to seeing you all on Thursday. Bye.